So my name is Ella, and I'm just going to start off by coming clean with you all. I am a major fan of science fiction novels. Now, I can see that I am potentially losing all of you, so I want to bring something forward that we might like a little bit more. C.S. Lewis science fiction. Okay, see what I did there? So C.S. Lewis wrote a truly exceptional book series that are called the Space Trilogy. These revolve around the character Dr. Elwyn Ransom. He is an English academic who is kidnapped and eventually taken on a spaceship to other planets. And so in our first book, which is called Out of the Silent Planet, Ransom escapes off of a spaceship onto the planet Mars, which is known as Malcandra. And during his time on this alien planet, he meets and befriends the planet's alien inhabitants, and he comes to learn that this planet is also ruled by the same God that he knows. He also comes to learn that this planet falls under the same battle that Ransom is familiar with between good and evil. So this story, lots happens, but it culminates in Ransom meeting a heavenly figure, a figure who is a mediator on behalf of God. So this creature's name is Eoyorsa, and immediately Ransom is terrified by what he describes as this creature's otherness. He's painfully aware of his own dirtiness in comparison to this creature's glory. He describes this glory as like a silence spreading over a room full of people, like an infinitesimal coolness on a sultry day, like a passing memory of some long-forgotten sound or scent, like all that is stillest and smallest and most hard to seize in nature. So he's seeing this creature, and Eoyorsa asks him, "What are you so afraid of, Ransom?" Ransom responds with, "Of you, because you are so unlike me." However, we come to see through this story that this heavenly figure desires a relationship with Ransom, despite their otherness. So does this concept of otherness seem at all familiar to you? This reaction of fear in responding to holiness is echoed throughout our text today. God's holiness reveals humanity's wickedness, the need for something to cleanse it, to set it right. But despite this wickedness that is so prevalent, God still desires to dwell with his people. So at this point in our story, humanity, who is represented by Israel, has lost the ability to dwell with God like they once did in Eden. This is due to their sinful hearts, sin that is all-encompassing. It's a festering disease of unholiness. God, in stark contrast, is holy. He's blinding, he's purifying, and he is terrifying in comparison with Israel. There is a great degree of purification that we see that's needed to bring them into this limited relationship with God at Mount Sinai. And it's only a dim shadow of what they once had in Eden. No longer do they walk together in the cool of the day in the garden. So my big idea for us tonight is, how can a holy God dwell with an unholy people? And I'm going to try and answer this question for us through 3 points. So first, understanding his holiness. Second, understanding his covenant. And third, understanding the implications. So first, allow me to set the scene for us with some review. So at this point in our story, the Israelites have come out of Egypt after 430 years. It's been 3 months of traveling together in the wilderness, and they have just seen the power of their God on full display. And we learned about this last week as we went through the 10 plagues. They've been delivered from slavery, and they've also just celebrated Passover together. They themselves have experienced deliverance in multiple ways. They're delivered from slavery, but they're also delivered from death. God has heard his people's cry, and he answers in abundance. And now they find themselves at Mount Sinai. So Mount Sinai is actually the same location as Horeb, or the mountain of God, which we learned about in Exodus 3. This is where God tells Moses at the burning bush that he will deliver his people from slavery. So Exodus 3:12 says, "But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. So this is God fulfilling his word. And this is our scene. So now God is addressing Israel through his spokesperson, Moses. So my first point tonight is understanding God's holiness. So the text that I'm going to read for us here, as we know, there's a lot tonight, so I'm just going to be doing smaller sections. So I'm going to read Exodus 19, 10 to 15. And it says, "The Lord said to Moses, 'Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments and be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. And you shall set limits for the people all around, saying, take care not to go up into the mountain or touch the edge of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be stoned or shot, whether beast or man, he shall not live. When the trumpet sounds a long blast, they shall come up to the mountain.' So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and consecrated the people, and they washed their garments. And he said to the people, 'Be ready for the third day. Do not go near a woman.'" So first, I think that something that is important for us to understand is what holy actually means. So I looked into this in Hebrew, and I will confess I am not a Hebrew scholar, but the word holy in Hebrew refers to this moral purity, and it also refers to being set apart for a specific purpose. We also see this concept of consecration through our text. It refers to a similar concept of making something holy and setting it apart, so going from this ordinary to the sacred. So you might be wondering, what are all those beautiful glasses doing up there? So again, I have to disclose with you today that one of my guilty pleasures is searching the thrift store and HomeSense, I'm not particular, for special glasses. I should probably cut myself off, but I just can't get enough of this activity. So I am currently curating a collection of beautiful glasses, but I am also very particular about the occasion that these get to be used. I'm not pulling them out for any old evening. No, they're being taken out at Thanksgiving, and then they're going to be put back into storage for their next special occasion. And that's what makes them special. That's a bit of a picture of what being set apart for a specific purpose looks like. So Exodus 19 takes us through the specifics of what consecration, being made holy, looks like for Israel to be in somewhat of a proximity to God. So first, we saw that they had to wash their garments. So this refers to this physical cleansing. They also had to practice sexual abstinence in the pursuit of this spiritual holiness or cleansing. We saw that there were 2 days of purification that were leading up to the third day, and we also saw physical boundaries and limits that were set around the mountain with a very real danger as punishment if those were breached. Now, I don't know what you ladies thought, but the first thing that came to mind for me upon reading that was first how specific these instructions are, but also Israel's proximity to God. The majority of Israel are actually not going onto this mountain. They themselves are not going up. There are some who do, but I think that this leads us to understand with better clarity what the state is of Israel before God. They're not able to stand before him in their current state. They're stained by sin. So that helps us to understand Israel's unholiness a bit better. So with that, let's move into understanding God's holiness. So I'm going to read from Exodus 19, 16 to 19 for us. Now, on the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God. And, where's my next page here? And let me see, I've lost it. Where is it? Took their stand. This is not good, ladies. They took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. Oh, it's on the other side. Perfect. Great. So in this section of text, we see that God is revealing himself to his people as holy. So there are a couple different ways which he does reveal himself. So the first, we see devouring fire, smoke, thunder, thick darkness, and trumpets. So these are images of these natural dangers and disasters. These are pieces of the created order that God is choosing to symbolize who he is. Fire, for example, it has this immense power. It has danger, and it also has purification potential. Smoke and thick darkness obscure. They hold an element of mystery. Humans cannot hope to fully know God. He is beyond our comprehension and our understanding. Thunder and lightning are capable of great destruction. And trumpets in the Old Testament had many different purposes, but one of them was this call to assemble. So all of these images should make us stop in awe and also strike fear into our hearts. God also reveals himself through his previous actions. In 19 verse 4, he opens with, "You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians." This harkens back to what we learned last week. All of these Egyptian plagues ending with all Egyptian firstborns being killed. And we also see that Israel was delivered from this exact devastation. So God is powerful, he is able, and he is in control. We also see God fulfilling his promises to Abraham in Genesis 15:12-14. He says, "Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions." Have we seen this happen? We have. And finally, God gives repeated warnings to Israel. I found this really fascinating that God has to warn Israel 4 separate times to not breach the boundaries of this mountain, and this is for their own safety. That tells us that God knows that his people need these reminders. There is a very real danger here that results from God's holiness, and the people need to understand who it is that they're dealing with. They were appropriately terrified at God's glory, and that leads them to obedience. So, what is the point of all of this holiness imagery? The Israelites needed to understand God's holiness, to hear and believe. His holiness also reveals to us why sin is such a big deal. It alienates them. And this reveals the Israelites' desperate need for something new, something that can restore their relationship with God. But God's holiness should also point Israel and us to a posture of gratitude. It is an immense privilege that a holy God like this desires a relationship with his people. The right response that should stem from that gratitude is obedience. This obedience will set the nation apart as God's treasured possession, a kingdom of priests, and a holy nation. And that means that Israel must look and act differently from the world. And sisters, we should too. Obedience to God alone will demonstrate to the surrounding nations that their allegiance is not to a man like Pharaoh or to a host of lowercase g gods. Their allegiance is to their holy king who has defeated their captors with ease. Do we take opportunities to thank God throughout our weeks for all that he has done for us, especially in light of his holiness? We should be women who are giving thanks. So Israel's holy God has brought them out of slavery, and he's bringing them into a new, better kingdom. So what must they do to live in a flourishing kingdom? So second point here is understanding his covenant. So we probably read through Exodus 20:2-17, which is the 10 Commandments. So I have them up here on a slide for us, so I'm just going to quickly run through what they are. They might be familiar to you. So first, you shall have no other gods before me. Second, you shall not make for yourself a carved image. Third, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. 4, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 5, honor your father and your mother. 6, you shall not murder. 7, you shall not commit adultery. 8, you shall not steal. 9, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And 10, you shall not covet. So we need to dive into what the Mosaic covenant actually looks like, especially contrasting to the Abrahamic covenant. Of course, there's far more that I could say, but for the sake of time, we're going to go through 4 unique aspects of the Mosaic covenant this evening. So first, this covenant is conditional. So by definition, there are conditions. So as a child, there are a couple things that you should know about me. So first off, I was absolutely obsessed with changing my outfits throughout the day. Could not get enough of this. But second, I was even more obsessed with my older brother, Sam. So how do these 2 facts relate to each other? An everyday occurrence was my mom getting me dressed and ready for the day, but when I would step foot outside of my room and see what my brother Sam was wearing, which was typically no shirt and some sort of camo pant, I would run back into my own closet and change my outfit to match his. So this resulted in many photos of me with no shirt and camo pants, but it was worth it so that I could match with my brother. But since this happened so many times a day, some rules had to be laid out for me. My mom said I was no longer allowed to change my outfit more than once a day. But this desire to resemble my brother, it was too strong for me. And I did lose the coveted privilege to be able to go into my closet by myself. Because I couldn't follow the good rules of my master, my mother, in this scenario, I lost the privilege of reveling in the blessing of the clothes that she had purchased me. So this is a bit of a silly illustration, but we do see that there are conditions. And this aspect of being conditional is the main difference that we see between our 2 covenants. So I want to be clear, Abraham did obey God, but that resulted in God making unconditional promises to his descendants. And this word unconditional is really important. So these promises will be fulfilled. But what is in question is who will benefit from God fulfilling these promises. So if Moses and the Israelites obey God, it will be their generation. But if they don't, it could be a different one. The point is that their obedience is essential and God could bless someone else. Another piece that marks this as conditional is that Israel enters into this covenant willingly. So we see a 2-sided covenant ceremony laid out for us in Exodus 24, 3-8. Moses builds an altar, they offer burnt and peace offerings, and there is blood that is taken. It's thrown, half of it on the altar to represent God and half on the people. And they repeat this affirmation 3 times of all the Lord has spoken, we will do. So this series of events should point us to remember another covenant ceremony that we learned about, where God took part in both sides. But now Israel plays a very real role. They need to be obedient, and this is a fundamental condition for God's promises to be fulfilled. So the second aspect that we see of this covenant is that it is shaped by God's character. Now, I don't know how many of you ladies were familiar with the 10 Commandments before. I personally grew up with these. And I think that my childlike understanding was that they were legalistic and impossible to follow. I didn't really understand why they were given to us. They almost seemed mean. And I think that this take is maybe a bit of a common one, but it actually couldn't be more misguided. So try and resist the urge to find this covenant legalistic. I know that it is easy, but try and resist it. Because God's law is not a random list of rules. They can be categorized into 2 sections, like we saw in our homework, how to love God and how to treat people. They're actually for the flourishing of Israel. These rules flow from God's character. So what do I mean when I say that? In my own time of study, I bolded the word "for" when I was reading through these 10 Commandments. And "for" refers to God's reasoning for why he's giving these rules. I would highly recommend doing this in your own study time. But these 4 statements are: God is a jealous God. He holds steadfast love. He is the holder of justice. He rests. And he has made the Sabbath holy. So God's reasoning for these laws, it's actually based on his own character. Also, he doesn't have to give us these reasons, by the way, but he chooses to. So because God is the way he is, his people need to act and live accordingly in response. God has brought Israel out of Egypt to be his people, and part of being his people means living under his rule. They have been rescued out of one kingdom into a new one. So our third aspect is that this covenant is relational. So this covenant has a distinctive emphasis on the relationship between God and his people. If they obey, Israel will be his treasured possession, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Do those descriptors seem neutral to you? Do they seem kind of lukewarm? No, they don't. Those are steeped in tenderness. Priests have limited access into God's presence. This should be mind-blowing. And as we know, a relationship, it involves responsibility. We saw that Adam and Eve rebelled against God. They lost the privilege of a relationship with him. And so what we're seeing here is this law being given to Israel to reestablish this relationship. We also know, like I said, this law is not an arbitrary set of conditions that they must keep. They're intended for the flourishing of Israel. At the heart of a relationship with God is the need to honor him alone. And so Israel is to obey God because of who he is and what he has done for them as their ruler. And then we also see that this covenant is connected to the Abrahamic covenant. So I know that this section can be a bit confusing, but try and bear with me here. I'm going to try and break it down for us. So it is really important for us to understand that the Mosaic covenant is not independent of the Abrahamic one, nor do they work against each other. They're actually both part of God's one plan of salvation. It's heading towards the same end of reversing the effects of the fall. These covenants fit within our big story of God's plan for salvation and restoration. So, the Abrahamic covenant, it actually addresses the effects of sin. It addresses what has been lost directly in the fall. So as a bit of a refresher for us, some of the things that were lost in the fall, they lost land, they lost an intimate relationship with God, they lost the abundance of the garden, and we see that death enters the world. And so God is addressing these losses with Abraham. He promises them a new land. He says that he will be their God. He will bless those who bless them, curse those who curses them. He says that they will be a great nation. But the Mosaic covenant, however, it addresses the deeper cause of sin, and that is the sin that is in human hearts. This covenant calls for humanity to act differently and to declare their allegiance to a different way of living entirely. Now, we have seen throughout this study that the wicked human heart, that's the real issue that's at stake here. We saw it in the flood, and this is why this covenant requires obedience from Israel. No matter how many good promises that God makes to Israel, they're still going to have a heart problem, and we know this to be true in ourselves. And so this Mosaic covenant hones in specifically on one of God's promises to Abraham, which we see in Genesis 17:8. He says that he will be their God. This is restored relationship. And so for this to happen, Israel must keep the terms of the Mosaic covenant. Exodus 19:5 says, "Therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine." This is an expansion of the Abrahamic covenant. And these promises in the Mosaic one reflects what is promised to Abraham. So, we have seen that this covenant is conditional. It is shaped by God's character. We see that it's relational at its core and that it is connected to the Abrahamic covenant. It's given to the Israelites by a holy God who is revealing his character to them through a set of guidelines that is intended for their flourishing. This covenant is their chance at living under and receiving the promises that are laid out for them by their good, holy God. Now, do we remember that we are actually citizens of a different kingdom than the world that we live in, like the Israelites? Do we treat the laws that God has laid out for us as good, an outflowing of his character, and for our flourishing? Do we acknowledge God's holiness as the basis for why we are to be obedient? Is that enough of a reason for us to trust him? It should be. When you're reading scripture in your own time and you bump into something that makes you uncomfortable, is God's holiness and lordship enough of a reason for you to trust him? And so if the Israelites are to be faithful, what will this mean for the relationship between them and God? So our third point is understanding the implications. So Exodus 24, 9-12 says, "Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel." Wow. There was under his feet as if it were a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. And he did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. They beheld God and ate and drank. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there, that I may give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandment, which I have written for this instruction." And so in this passage, we are seeing something that is truly remarkable. They are invited to behold God. This should make us stop in our tracks. The God of Israel, who is represented to us in fire and smoke and thunder, a God who defeats nations, a God who is Lord over life and death alike, invites a chosen few of his people to see him, to gaze at him, to behold him, to share a meal in his presence and worship. So this relational covenant has world-changing implications. This is a shadow of a return to Eden. Could the people of Israel dwell with their God again? This is real, intimate companionship. They eat and drink and behold God. Now, we all know that there are different degrees of closeness or intimacy in relationships. So, for example, say that you and I are new friends. Maybe we met at a Bible study on a Monday night, and we start sending the occasional text back and forth, and we are just giving each other little life updates. So probably you and I are not defining ourselves at this point as intimate friends. Probably we're not sharing the deepest cares of our hearts and our sin struggles with each other. But if we continue to invest in relationship with each other, and maybe you invite me over to your house to share a meal together, you and I might have reached a different point in our relationship where we are free to share the cares of our hearts. Maybe we're praying together, we're in relationship. And this is what we're seeing here. Moses and a select other few are being invited into companionship with God. Now, it might be hard for us in our current context to understand the magnitude of people seeing God, but just try to remember what we have just learned about his holiness. I find it really fascinating that all we see described is what is under his feet. God is simply too glorious for the people to describe, and it doesn't seem outside the realm of possibility to me that maybe they weren't looking at his face. Maybe they couldn't. They couldn't find the human words to describe him. But in light of the consequences of breaking through the limits of the mountain that were described in previous chapters, this sort of communion with God is mind-blowing. This is God choosing to reveal himself to his treasured people, and he is reminding them of who they are to be obedient and faithful to. If they do so, they get to dwell with him. So now, at this point in our story, there are still a limited number of people who are invited to see God and share this meal on Mount Sinai. There is clearly still work to be done, and our story is not over, but there is hope. God's desire at the heart of the Mosaic covenant is to dwell with his people, to increase the degree of intimacy with them, and we can see tangibly that God is fulfilling his promises. He's declaring a new kingdom for his people with himself as their good king and blessing his people, and all they must do is respond to him in obedience. We see beautiful flickers of hope in Scripture. This point of the story should make our hearts soar with the potential hope of restoration. And this relates to us too. We're not separate from this story as passive listeners. This should fill us with gratitude at the state of our relationship with God now. Our God is still holy. He is the same God as we read and learn about here. We are still infected with this disease of sin, and we should not be able to stand before God. The dangers and the consequences that we see laid out here, those should be ours. But however, and what a beautiful word however is, because of Christ, we can have a deeply tender and intimate relationship with God. So take advantage of this great gift. Hebrews 4:16 says that we can boldly approach the throne of grace. Do you do that? So my call to action for us this week: revel in gratitude. Take opportunities to thank God and reflect on what it is that he has done. Dwell on the joyful reality that we actually don't have to bear the burden of perfect obedience. We can't take it. Someone has done it on our behalf. I won't get into who that is right now, but keep on coming to study to find out. And if you don't have a relationship with this holy God yet, today could be your opportunity. There are so many women here who love him and would love to talk to you about him, myself included. So, how can a holy God dwell with an unholy people? By understanding his holiness, understanding his covenant, and understanding the implications. So what do we think, ladies? Will Israel be able to hold up their end of the covenant? Will they remain faithful to the very end? Will their holy God dwell with them? Do we think that their heart problem will finally be solved with this new covenant? Or does something or someone need to step in on their behalf? So let's pray together. Father, I thank you that you are a holy God, and I thank you that you pursue us. You are holy, and we are so grateful that you still love us and that you have chosen us. It is mind-boggling that you have done it, but thank you that you have. I pray that you would allow us to be grateful children who reflect on the gift of a relationship with you. Lord, it is such a gift. In your precious name, I pray. Amen.